Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people truly believe that they can do what they want, when they want, because they're special. And in today's episode, we're dealing with Karen nurses, greedy family members, people wreaking havoc in stores, a gang of college kids terrorizing a store, and one OP shares a story about an entitled Karen encounter when they were a lifeguard. It's such a wild one today, so don't shake your heads too hard. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So this happened back in 1999. I was pregnant with child number 4, and I went into labor at 3:30 in the morning. Ex-hubby and I rushed to the hospital since each baby had come faster than the previous. Now, before 9/11, security in the small local hospital meant that you had to go through the ER. There was no guard on the door, just a wandering one. So I go to the check-in desk and I wait for a triage nurse to appear. I continue to have contractions, and with each new one, I get lower, and I end up mostly on my knees on the floor. In the meantime, I become aware of the nurse in the side room where they do your blood pressure, pulse, and temperature and find out why you're there. I think, okay, she's with someone. I hope this doesn't take long. I get a small window between the contractions, so I stand to walk around to help the process. Now, I wasn't trying to listen to her conversation, but she was talking a little loud. And shocker, it wasn't another patient she's talking to. She's on the phone with a friend. This nurse was loudly laughing about this party she had been to right before shift, and how she couldn't wait to get back to it, and oh my goodness, the cute guys that were there, that she couldn't wait to hook up with. It's at this point I start up a new round of labor pains, so as she continues to gush about the oh so adorable guy she saw, I suddenly shout at her and I say, "Hey, do you want to come and do your effing job, or do you want me to drop this kid on the floor?" We had been standing there for over 15 minutes already, just listening to her yap away, and I'm trying to be patient, but hello, I'm giving birth here. And this girl was talking personal, not work. Well, she has the nerve to call security on me, and she says, "If you aren't in labor, I'm getting the police for making a disturbance." Security had to take me to labor and delivery instead of an orderly. He was required to wait while it was determined if I was ready to deliver or not, per the ER nurse. Well, the labor and delivery nurse checks me, and not only was I dilated to 10 centimeters, I was 100% ready, as baby's head was right there. The doctor barely made it in time to catch my son. The security guy had left at some point. Later that same morning, I get a visit from nursing director for the ER. She asked me what happened the previous night, as quite the ruckus was caused, and the security guy had only seen the aftermath, not what started it. I explained why I got so upset, and yes, I had shouted at her, but only about her needing to do her job, and that planning her hookup with guys should be on her own time, not on the job. It turned out she was spending hours on the phone making personal calls and showing up for work after drinking heavily. So she was drunk during her shifts. Needless to say, the cops were not called as I gave birth within 30 minutes of entering the hospital. But she was fired and blacklisted to all of our area hospitals, so she couldn't get a new job without moving. My son was born healthy and he's 26 this year, so all's well that ends well. Thankfully, this was my last, so never had to deal with that again. Yeah, I'm just glad to know it all worked out that night, and what a night it must have been for OP. And you know what? Screaming at people for not doing their job properly might make somebody a Karen, but in this instance, with OP being 10 centimeters dilated, in pain on the floor, and ready to pop out the baby onto the floor, I can understand why OP tore into that nurse. And seriously, finding out that Karen was often drunk on the job, totally deserved. So I'm a huge fan, and I love hearing the crazy stories, and I thought I'd share a story of my own. Back when I was a teenager, I worked for a small family-owned grocery store as a cashier. It was a pretty boring job, but we had a few crazies come in, so we always knew who to look out for. One evening, I was scanning this woman's and her daughter's groceries. Let's call the woman Karen and the daughter Kay. Also, as a note, which becomes more relevant later, I'm white, and Karen and her daughter are African American. So Karen's buying a variety of junk food, and towards the end, there was a bucket of chocolate-covered pretzels. When I ring it up, the lady tells me the price is wrong, which is fine. Our computers are old, and the prices can be wrong on occasion when management updates for sales and such. So I asked the lady behind the counter, Linda, to check the price for me. When she comes back, she apologizes, but she says the price that Karen's talking about is for potato chips, which are next to the pretzels on the shelf. The shelves were just stocked, so they were really full, and on occasion, tags get mixed up, so this can happen. Usually not a big deal. The Karen then says that she should get the pretzels for the price she saw, because we made the mistake and how another store down the street would honor the price for the mistake, which is their policy. Linda apologizes and she says that isn't our policy, so we can't do that. Karen then asks for the manager, who basically says the same thing as Linda, but she's more firm since she doesn't take crap from anybody. Karen's visibly annoyed at this point, and she begins spouting some nonsense, how she's never coming back, how she's gonna use her daughter's social media to get the whole store shut down, the usual Karen stuff. I did feel bad for her daughter, but almost laughed because she straight up said something along the lines of, "No mom, you won't use my social media for that, just pay it and go." The daughter also apologized to me while her mom made a huge scene, which made me feel even worse for her. So we finish up the transaction and Karen still buys the pretzels and pays for it. When I hand her the receipt, I apologize again for the mix-up, and she looks at me dead in the eye and she calls me racist and sexist for how I treated her. I was really taken aback by this, and I basically just stood there for a moment, gathering my thoughts as she left. I was really upset, so I just turned my light off and I took a minute to myself out of public view. My manager, who helped with the interaction, told me not to worry about it, and how you're damned if you do, damned if you don't with some customers. After a few seconds, I returned to work, and I continued the night with no other issue. I did see that Karen again a few times, but when we saw each other, she never came through my line, so good riddance to bad rubbish. Thankfully, I'm done with that job and have another because working retail sucks. So this happened only a few weeks ago, and I still get pissed off when I think about this idiot and his friends. That said, I will proudly admit to being a huge nerd, and after my years of saving and dreaming, I was lucky enough to finally open up a small game store on the Pacific Northwest coastline a few years ago. And like so many coastal areas during the summer, this is our busy time of the year, with our small town dealing with hundreds of tourists until early autumn. Well, rather than just doing my usual business, my friend, who let's call Misty, came up with the idea of running a tabletop game day camp for various age groups, the youngest being around 6 or 7, all the way up to late teens. Now, it's important to note that even though we had this day camp going on, we still tried to keep a few other tables free for other customers who were either too old or not interested in attending the event. Cue a gaggle of college-age people coming in one day when we were fairly busy, with only 2 of our smaller tables left available. The apparent leader, who shall be called King D-Bag, looks around the store before coming up to the counter with a swagger that makes you want to smack someone upside the head. He comes up to me and says, "Hi there. So my friends and I are looking for a place to play some D&D, but we don't see any free space. Is there a chance you could clear up a table for us?" Now, keep in mind that the 2 smaller tables could comfortably fit a half-dozen people around both of them if they were pushed together, and if the idiot turned around and looked off to the right, he would be looking right at them. Me, kind of surprised and a bit annoyed that this was the approach the dude was going with, said, "Oh yeah, there's a few tables right over there, and there is a one-time fee of 15. I didn't get any further before I'm cut off. King D-Bag looks at the other tables and then looks back at me with a disgusted look on his face, and he says, No, those won't do. They're way too small for what we want to do. How about that one?" He then points to our biggest table where Misty was doing a deck building workshop with about 10 or so younger kids. At this point, I'm still trying to be polite and looking for a solution. So I say, I'm sorry guys, but that's in use for the day camp we offer here. If you want to come back later though, we do have the store open for a couple of hours after the camp ends, and our tables are usually open by then. Of course, King D-Bag's not having it. He says, no, we have plans later today. This is the only time we have to play and we need a table. Let us take that bigger table and move them here. At this point, I'm at the end of my patience, and I say, well then man, I don't know what to tell you. I have these 2 tables that would give you more than enough space. Otherwise, there might be somewhere else. And this is where I'm cut off again, but now King D-Bag looks like a hairy tomato. He slams his fist on the counter and he says, I want to play my game without any effing kids around, and at that table. I glanced over his shoulder to see if this idiot's followers would try to step in to calm down this raging man-child, but no. I'm both shocked and pissed as heck to see a few of them even having big grins on their stupid faces. Meanwhile, the rest of the store has gone deathly quiet, with Misty doing her best to calm some kids down, but unfortunately, that doesn't last long. One of King D-Bag's brain-dead followers then walks over to the table, picks up one of the decks that was previously being built, and chucks it right at me. Cue the kid who the deck belonged to bursting into tears. This repeated 2 more times before I find my voice. Probably for the best because Misty was looking like she was ready to give them a rectal exam with a table leg. I then say, alright, you guys have 2 choices. Either you get the F out of my store right now or I'm gonna call the cops. And yes, I know in this kind of situation, it's always smart to get the cops involved. But I wanted to get these idiots away from these kids as soon as possible. Now, I don't know what made these idiots think that they were in the right though, because King D-Bag gives me the biggest grin and he literally dares me to call the cops. Thankfully, the police station's only like 10 minutes drive from my shop, so the response time is decent, especially given we're a smaller town. During the time of calling, Misty and I shelter the kids behind the counter, and we were thankfully able to reach a few parents to do a pickup at the back door to avoid agitating the guy and his friends even more. Meanwhile, this group of seemingly well-adjusted adults throw even more decks off of their precious table, and they actually start setting up their D&D game. They don't get too far though before a deputy comes in and surveys the situation. Let's call him Brock. Before I can get a word out, King D-Bag is off and running his mouth saying, "Oh good that you're here, officer. My friends and I came in to play a peaceful game of D&D, and this man wouldn't let us use a table, and he started discriminating against us. And I want to note that everyone in his group was whiter than an untoasted marshmallow, and the guy says they're refusing us service." Brock, looking around at the remaining crying kids and a huge mess of thrown cards all over the shop, says, and I'm assuming that's what prompted this response. King D-Bag says, "Oh no, the kids started throwing their cards at us when we sat down to play. And now it's my turn to cut this idiot off." I say, "Hey, Brock, I have cameras throughout my store. Do you want to take a look?" Pointing to the one in the back that has a full view of my whole store. At the word camera though, it was like a switch flipped in King D-Bag's brain, and he says, "Oh no, there's no need for that." Brock, Misty, and I all exchange a look before Officer Brock says, "Yeah, I'm gonna have to go take a look. If you try to leave, you'll be charged with disorderly conduct and destruction of property." While this is happening, Misty and I are still making sure that we can get as many kiddos back to their parents as we can, while the group of now not so confident idiots remain sitting around a table before Brock comes back. Brock starts to talk, but he didn't get any further than, "Well, I reviewed the footage," before King D-Bag jumps up and he starts booking it to the front door. And you remember how they decided that throwing cards around was such a good idea? Well, yeah, cards can be slick on a carpeted floor, and my dude learned the hard way. There was a sickening crack as his head slams into the doorframe. The guy was out cold. This has been a long story already, so I'll try to wrap it up. In the end, King D-Bag got to go for a ride in an ambulance, as well as a promise from Brock that he'll be facing charges, as well as his friends who threw the decks. They were charged with destruction of property, disorderly conduct, and public intoxication for one of them. This was by far the worst day ever since I opened my store. But thankfully, most of the families of the kids who were there were pretty understanding, and were given a load of free booster packs each to replace the damaged cards. I can confidently say that I will still host events, and I'll invite anyone to my store, but this was definitely an eye-opening experience, that just because someone's an adult doesn't mean they'll always act that way. What a freaking mess that was, guys. And listen, if I had $1 for every single time I've met a spoiled, entitled adult in my life, I think I'd have quite the full piggy bank. And honestly, it seems the way things are going nowadays, there's even more and more adults who can't adult, and they have the mentality of kids. Like, it's either that or I'm just reading too many Karen stories, guys, and I'm just super aware. But yeah, what in the world was that entitled King D-Bag's endgame here? Throw a tantrum, toss cards around, boot out a bunch of kids, and he thinks he can then still sit down to play a nice game of D&D. Like, this guy is frickin' delusional, I tell you. But hey, that's a lot of entitled people out there. So this story will have people scratching their heads for family. When my grandmother had a stroke, my uncle, my mom's oldest brother, and my grandmother moved in next door. Of course, my uncle expected my mother and myself to take care of her, which we both did gladly. But a couple of years later, my mom died, and I moved into the house next door to my grandmother, into my mom's old house. I continued to take care of my grandmother, and then both my uncle and my grandmother got sick with cancer. Now, mind you, none of his kids ever came down to take care of him, and I was left to take care of both with cancer. In June, my uncle dies from his cancer, and my grandmother is still living. All of a sudden, his kids, who told him that they wanted nothing to do with him, now wanted to come and take care of grandma, because they had heard she had about $10 million in the bank. I was no longer allowed in the house, and I was told I was no longer needed, because they were going through everything with a fine-tooth comb to find out where the money was hidden. About a month later, my grandmother passes, and that's when my other uncle comes down with his wife. They finally get into the house by forcing the kids to open the door with the police. When my aunt and uncle walk in, they see everything in the house is marked with pieces of tape with everyone's initials. This included my cousin's girlfriend, my other cousin's wife, and my other cousin's husband, who we've never even met before. There wasn't one thing in that house that wasn't marked with someone's initials. Well, first off, it didn't belong to any of them. It was supposed to go into probate, and the girlfriends, the husbands, and wives weren't even blood relatives, so they weren't supposed to be getting anything. Since my mother was the only daughter, there were certain things that was supposed to be handed down, but my cousin's girlfriend was trying to get all of that stuff. When we finally met with a lawyer, they tried to tell them that they can't take anything from the house, or do anything with any of the money. That is, until everything was settled in court. But here's the thing, they already spent half of her money because they found the bank records. Needless to say, it took almost 12 years for all of that to settle, and the attorneys out of that $10 million got a third of it. My cousin stole about $5 million, and the rest of it had to be divided, which they somehow finagled where they got most of it. It's amazing how greedy people become when somebody dies. Nobody wanted to take care of either one of them while they had cancer and were living, and I did. And I came out with nothing other than a set of cheap china that my grandmother had gotten for free. Oh my goodness, guys, it literally pains me to know that OP got nothing, despite being the most caring person, and she did the most out of everyone. And OP's right, nothing turns families against each other quicker than a death in the family and the splitting of assets. Like, money literally brings out the true character of some people. And seriously, guys, to know that people who weren't even there for grandma when she was sick, who came crawling back after she died to put their name on her belongings, makes me sick. So I've been watching your videos on my way to and from work, and I got reminded of an encounter I had 5 years ago. I'd been a lifeguard at my local pool since I was old enough to have a job, and when I gained enough experience, I was offered the position of manager. The manager duties mainly consisted of balancing pool chemicals, cashing out, and making sure the lifeguards are doing their jobs and enforcing rules properly. But we also have to help patrons if they have any questions that the lifeguards can't answer. So that said, on this fine summer day, I was finishing my hourly check of the pool chemicals when a lifeguard on deck whistles for my attention. I walked over to see what they needed. My guard then informs me that while I was in the pump room, a family had come in and they had set themselves up in the baby pool with the floaty that they thought I should go check. Now here's a note on the rules before we meet the stars of the story. Since the pool we worked at was operated by the county and not a private company, our rules regarding life jackets and flotation devices are more strict than other places, but they're simple to follow. The only flotation devices allowed were Coast Guard approved ones, which can be verified by markings inside, or just by big bold letters saying US Coast Guard approved. So I go over to greet this family. It's a husband and a wife with a baby who couldn't have been a year old at the time. The guy was on the deck, pulling things out of a bag, setting their things up, while the lady was in the water with the baby in one of those water baby chairs with an inflatable ring around the edge. I come up to the edge of the pool and I say, "Good day, ma'am. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I need to take a look at your baby's flotation device. One of my lifeguards had some concerns about it, so I need to verify that it's Coast Guard certified." Karen, immediately trying to assert her Karen dominance, gave me a disgusted look, and she said in a very annoyed tone, "It is Coast Guard certified." I, unmoved, insisted again, and I say, "I'm sorry, but I need to verify on the label that it states that. Otherwise, you won't be able to use it." Karen huffed at this, but didn't move. I don't know if she thought that I would just leave her be if she tried to ignore me, but she was only standing in a small circular pool that's maybe 30 or 40 feet around and 1 foot deep, so I simply just stepped in the water to check the label. Immediately, I found what I was looking for. Written on the top of the safety information label along the outer ring of the flotation device in big, bold letters, it said, "This is not a Coast Guard approved flotation device." I just stared at the label for a few seconds before looking up at Karen, who was staring at me indignantly, and I said, "Ma'am, unfortunately, it says right here that this is not an approved flotation device. I'm going to need you to not use it." Now, clearly, this was the wrong thing for me to say, and Karen was gonna make sure that I knew that. The woman scoffs, and she says, "Well, it said online that it was Coast Guard approved." Trying not to make her any angrier, but not budging from the point, I say, "Ma'am, I'm sorry if the site you ordered this from misled you, but it says right here that it's not." And I gesture to the label clearly displayed on the side. Not even looking at the label, Karen continues ranting to me, saying, "Well, it said online that I could bring it to the beach, and it won't tip over. If I can bring it to the damn beach, why can't I use it here, huh?" That's when I say, "Ma'am, you are welcome to bring it to the beach if you want to, but I can't allow you to use it here. It's against the rules." And this is when Karen's husband, feeling upstaged and wanting to prove that he's just as entitled as Karen, butts into the conversation. The guy steps to the edge of the pool, trying to intimidate me by looming over me. And he says angrily through gritted teeth, "Where is that rule written, huh? Where is it posted? How are we supposed to know that it's a rule here if it's not posted anywhere?" At this point, I'm completely oblivious to this man's attempt at intimidation, since I'm more caught on this man's ignorance. You see, what he and his wife clearly didn't see, or perhaps ignored, was the half-dozen signs stating this exact rule that he had passed since he entered the facility. The one on the gate to the baby pool, the one on the wall of the concession stand, the two at the entrance and exit to the bathrooms, and most egregious of all, the one taped on the counter right next to the prices for admission. Instead of outright calling him an idiot, I tried to stay civil so I would still have a job at the end of the day. And I simply said, "Sir, There are several signs posted throughout the facility stating this rule. I'm simply enforcing it. Once again, this was clearly not the right thing to say, as the guy puffs up his chest and he began running his mouth again. I went back and forth with the pair of them a few more times before they start swearing at me, and that's when I put my foot down and I say, okay, I've been plenty civil over this, but I will not tolerate you swearing at me. This is the rule and you will follow it. Please get your baby out of the floaty and take it out of the water, or I will kindly ask you to leave. And with that, I turned around and walked away. I walked back over to the guard office and I pulled my chair out on deck, and I placed it in a shaded spot that had a view of the main pool and the baby pool, so I could keep an eye on them. They packed up their floaty and the rest of their things, and they sat themselves down on a pair of deck chairs, talking between themselves. About 15 minutes later, when my lifeguards on duty rotated their positions, the guard coming down for their break walked through the baby pool to do a quick check, and then came over to me with a grin on their face. They say they're complaining about you over there and they want you fired, but I told them that you're the manager. For the next hour or so, they just sat in their chairs, and every 15 minutes, one of my guards would walk through and come to me to report that they were still bad-mouthing me. And all I could do was sit there and laugh to myself that people could be that petty. When they finally got up to leave, they walked past me sitting to the side. The husband looked at me and then held up the floaty. He then waved it at me and said, "Bye, Karen. Have a nice day, Karen." To which I smirked. I was extremely amused that this entitled pair thought that I was the Karen in this situation. I just raised my water bottle and I waved back saying, "Just doing my job, sir." Listen, I can see how the couple thought that OP was the Karen in this one, as it's only a foot of water and what's the harm, right? But rules are frickin' rules. Like, if an accident happened and the floaty thing wasn't certified, that's a huge lawsuit waiting to happen. And I personally don't think that someone's being a Karen when they're trying to cover their own butt at their job and the company's. Guys, let me know your thoughts. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy, crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's in r/I don't work here lady, where Karens think that cripples were put on Earth to serve them. It's such a wild episode, so go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.